My family and I go on huge camping trips every year, but this year we decided to go somewhere new instead of our usual camping site. This year we rented a plot of bare land for 1 week in the middle of the woods, which meant we would be without service for the most part, but we found it exciting. There was only 3 of us that would go on our yearly camping trips: me, my brother, and my cousin. I should also mention that I am very clairvoyant, and ever since I was little, I have been able to see spirits. I discovered this when I was 2, and when I began to talk, I had an imaginary friend who lived in my closet and who would come out to play every day. I've seen a lot of positive things, and I've also seen a lot of negative and evil spirits. I don't control when they come through though, but I can usually ignore them if I don't want to communicate at that moment. The drive to the camp spot was around 2 hours outside of the city. Once we got there, we pulled up and parked the van. It was all so quiet and beautiful, with the sun peeking through the trees, making them look almost golden. There were birds chirping and the air smelled clean and fresh. It was breathtaking. We set up our one tent trailer, a small tent, and a canopy cover that was protected by this mesh so bugs couldn't get through. It didn't take us long, and since there was still a few hours of sunlight left, we decided to go on a walk to explore the area. The paths in the bush were very overgrown with brush and plant growth. We walked for a while until we hit this opening. It seemed normal until we saw stuff hanging from the trees. We all stopped and looked around. Hanging from the trees were bones that were tied together with what looked like human hair. I instantly felt sick to my stomach, and as I stood looking at the trees, in my right ear, a soft, breathy voice whispered, "Get out of here. Run." I turned to my brother and my cousin and screamed run, and without hesitation or question we all ran. Cutting through the thick woods towards our camp spot was hard, and I felt so uneasy the whole time. We flew out of the edge of the woods. Once we stopped and caught our breaths, they just looked at me, waiting for me to tell them what I had saw or heard that caused us all to run. I explained to them about the voice in my ear and told them how it was a warning. Something wasn't right about this land. We decided to stay close to our trailer for the rest of the night. My brother was going to sleep in the tent by himself, but after seeing what was out in those woods, he decided to sleep in the tent trailer with us. We watched movies and played board games until we all went to sleep. While I was sleeping, I had a dream of a woman who had blonde hair and these very dark brown eyes. She was standing in the clearing that we were just at earlier, and she was just staring at me. She then started to breathe heavily, when all of a sudden these cloaked figures started coming out of the woods holding those bones and hair objects that we saw in the trees. They began to circle the woman, and it was as if she couldn't move. As we got closer, she began to scream, and I began to look around and call for help. But when I turned back, she was standing right in front of me. Her face was so close, and she began to scream. It was like her jaw dislocated, and she started crying blood. I woke up and I was standing outside facing the direction of where the clearing was. I don't know how I got outside, but my eyes adjusted to the forest line and saw figures and cloaks standing in the brush of the forest almost out of my eyesight. I kept my eyes on them while walking backwards trying to get back to the tent trailer. I reached it and reached for the handle, but it was locked, which made no sense since I had to get out of it to end up near the forest. I began to knock on the door and calling my brother's name. I looked away for a second, and when my eyes met the forest line again, they were now on the edge of it, as if they were getting closer. I began to scream and the door swung open. I pushed my way into the tent trailer and began to pray. I don't know why I did this, but I thought it would cast whatever they were away. I don't know if they were spirits or witches or normal people, but either way, the dream I got was a warning. We all stayed awake for the rest of the night, hoping that we would make it to sunrise. The first chance we got when the sun came up, we were out of there. We contacted the person who we were paying and requested our money back. They did say no, but our lives and safety were more important than that $900. Next summer, we are going to go to our normal and known camping spot. At least there, the spirits don't bug me. The moonlight rises as the sun falls. The night started to come alive. I decided to go for a late night walk. I live on a small acreage outside of town about 30 minutes out. I loved it out here. I was an adventurous kind of guy who loved to go hiking and exploring, but I've never done it at night. There's been a few odd sightings of paranormal activity in this nearby Branden church. So me being my adventurous self, I decided to take a walk over. It's about 11 p.m. as I was walking. I heard the old church bells going off in the distance. I can hear it every night, but I never knew who was making it go off. It was kinda creepy, but I went along with it. The sound got closer and closer as I walked into the dark woods. It was clear now, and I seen the bell shaking back and forth like someone was pushing it, but seen no one behind it. Eventually it stopped after 5 minutes. I walked towards the church and made it to the front door. Devil's Playground carved into the big wooden doors. Some of the letters had blood dripping down. I opened the door. It creaked so loud like it hasn't been opened in ages. The chairs were worn out, scratches and carvings all over them, and right in front was the statue pinned to an upside-down cross. It was a man with a goat's head. I was creeped right out. The doors behind me slammed shut. "Welcome," I heard being whispered. There was a ghostly-looking figure kneeling down in front of the horrific statue. I started to feel nauseous, like I'm about to pass out. I snapped back into it and turned around trying to open the doors. I was locked in, not knowing what to do now. I turned around and the figure kneeling was now gone. I feel a little bit of cold air coming down my spine, and it almost felt like somebody is breathing down my neck. I panicked and started to run. There was stairs leading to the basement. I ran down the stairs quickly, each step making a creaking noise, like it was about to break. My foot fell through one of the steps, and I struggled pulling it out. Something grabbed my foot, then let go. I fell face first onto the basement floor. I hit my head pretty hard, but nothing too bad. I got back up and decided to make my way back upstairs. I felt my way up the stairs, each one creaking as I slowly crawled my way up. When I reached the top of the stairs, a shrill, whispery voice could be heard from the bottom of the stairs whispering, "Please stay." I'm not sure if it was the adrenaline or my survival instinct, but I got to my feet and ran towards the door. When I reached the door and turned the handles, it opened with such a speed I almost flew backwards. I regained my footing and sprinted out of the door, exiting the house. As I ran, I never looked back. I didn't stop running until I reached my home. As I caught my breath, I began to question my sanity, whether it was all real or just a hallucination. I refused to ever go back to that place again, and hope no one ever steps foot there. I am a very logical person. Everything I do or see has an explanation, almost like a butterfly effect. One action causes a reaction. But in my whole 32 years of life, there is one thing that I've never been able to explain. When I was 19, I moved out of my parents' house into a 2-bedroom apartment to live by myself. Back in the day, that was affordable, being only $450 a month. But to be fair, it was on the bad side of town, and I had gotten a good deal on it because no one had wanted to buy the place. The 2 bedrooms were huge, and I didn't know why people weren't snatching up this place, considering how cheap it was. I was excited about being able to call a place my home. It is what many young people dream of being able to do. To have a place of their own, to decorate it the way that you want, and be completely in control of your own life. I got all moved into the place in the middle of July, so the apartment was extremely hot, and there was no way to cool it off besides opening the windows and turning on the fans. The biggest bedroom I made my bedroom, and the smaller room was just a little office or den, but I knew I wouldn't use it as much. The first night there, I had trouble sleeping because it was a new space, but just before 2 a.m. I heard this strange sound coming from the other room. It sounded like a tapping sound followed by whimpering and crying. I brushed it off thinking maybe it was just the neighbors in the other apartment. I finally dozed off, but was awoken by banging coming from the living room and kitchen area. I heard glass shattering and things hitting the floor. I grabbed a broom that was in my room and ran out to see what was happening. As I swung the door open, the sound stopped, and when I walked out, my couch had been flipped over. Half of my dishes were broken on the floor, my magazines flung everywhere, and the place looked like it had been broken into and trashed. I slowly peered around the corner to look at my front door, but it was locked, deadbolted and all. I stood there in shock, almost with a sense of sadness that a lot of my stuff had been broken and thrown around. I called the police because I feared that somebody may be in my apartment. They said that they would be over as fast as they could. I stayed in the living room with my back against the wall waiting. As I waited, the sound of the tapping and sobbing could be heard coming from my den again. I froze and with a quiet voice said, "Hello?" The sobbing stopped and a voice quietly cried back, "Be careful. He's aggressive. Don't let him see you." Someone was definitely in my apartment, and now I was stuck in here not knowing where this man was and who that woman is. After a lot of thinking, I decided to run for the front door. I began to run and unlock the door, swinging it open, and was face to face with some police officers. I began to explain how my home had been trashed and there was a crying woman in my den, and she said there was a dangerous man in here. They didn't even look surprised at what I had just said, almost like they had heard it before. They asked to come in and look around. After checking every room, they said no one was here, and said if there was any other problems to call back, and before they turned and walked away, they recommended getting sage or a priest. I was confused and still shaken up. I didn't sleep the whole night, just sitting by the front door. In the morning, I heard a little knock on my door, which made me jump. I opened it a little to see that there was a little old woman standing there. She said her name was Rosie and that she lived next door. She asked to come in so we could talk. I let her in because what harm could a little old lady do? And I really didn't want to be alone. She was very blunt and told me 3 years ago a man and a woman lived here. He was abusive and would drink and hurt her. He'd lock her in the second room and she would always be heard crying. He would get so angry and violent. She said she could always hear stuff being smashed and broken. He eventually ended up taking her life in the second bedroom, and he also took his own life in the living room. Ever since the police found them, the spirits have stayed and been living the same day over and over for the past 3 years. The woman explained how she kept hearing the crying and stuff breaking. I stared at her in shock, how she'd even know what had happened last night. But I believed her somehow. But I can't explain it. She told me the longest anyone had ever lived there after the incident was a month, and they ended up being taken to a mental hospital because he went insane. She told me to back out of the lease and to move out, or else I would have the same fate. The next day, all my stuff was packed and moved out, and I went back home for a bit so I could find a new place. I never believed in spirits. But living there, that is the one thing I could never understand. Summer is my least favorite season because growing up, my parents worked 3 jobs and were barely home. So when I was young, I would be alone most nights. When I was 9, I remember sitting in my room watching Transformers. I had just made myself a grilled cheese and was settling in for the night. I was home alone like usual, so all of the lights were on in the house and all the doors were locked. My front door was made out of this frosted glass, so you couldn't look in, but you could see if there was a silhouette on the other side of the door. I was maybe 30 minutes into the movie when I heard a knock on the door. I sat and listened for a bit until I took another bite of my grilled cheese, when I was interrupted again by another knock. I didn't pause the movie, but got up and made my way down the hall to peek around the corner towards the door. The silhouette of a man could be seen on the other side of the glass. They had their hands cupped around their eyes and a face was pressed against the glass trying to look in. I remember little me freezing, and I couldn't move. I just wanted my mom or my dad to come home. As I stood frozen, the doorknob began to jingle, and in that moment I ran to my room, locked the door, and dove into my bed and hid under my covers. This wouldn't have helped me if they got in, but my kid brain made it seem safe. I was so scared I stayed under my blanket for a while before making my way back out to see if they had left. When I checked the door again, there was no one there. Years later, I brought up that night to my mom, and that is when she revealed that night there was an Amber Alert sent out because there was a man who had escaped from prison and was in jail for hurting women and children. I'm convinced he was at the door that night, and I'm so glad I didn't forget to lock the door. Hello, and thank you so much if you made it to the end of the video. If you like this video, make sure to give it a like and subscribe to let me know you'd like to see more content like this. If you have any stories you'd like to share that could be in a future video, make sure to head over to Reddit, or you can send it through email. My Reddit and email will be shown on the screen. Thank you so much for watching and have a good morning, evening, or night. Bye guys!